Hi, Vanessa. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
So I'm going to share my screen.
Awesome.
So this piece, the minute I saw it, it made me think of Betty Saar's work with glass and her references to the bottle trees. I was wondering if that was something that
Yeah, that's always alive in my work. And understanding to go forth into anything that we talk about is that art is the fundamental technology of my humanity. It's the way that I am able to decolonize my heart, my soul, my mind. And that means that process is really important to me. Like, so what is happening when I'm making the art is when I'm actually the technology of making all of those things that come in from the intellectual prowess, from the different parts of my brain that have to go to work, whether it's like frontal lobe part or whether it's the engineering centers of the brain. I recognize all of those ingredients as the fundamental technology that I'm able to inhabit my humanity with. So that means I am experiencing the entire world. The material world, I'm experiencing all of it through this technology that is that uses that is uses as its fuel core love.
Mhm.
So I am, as an African American descendant from enslaved Africans who were on the large plantations. I actually know the name of some of the plantations in Louisiana.
Wow.
A descendant of enslaved Africans. So that means I can only chase my story back so far. I'm always doing that thing that a lot of African Americans are doing, where for you are looking for a feeling in the world that recognizes you, where you recognize yourself inside of it. And so I had always been a collector from the time I was a child. I was always the type of person who would see things on the ground and pick things up. I was always turning one thing into something else and making an intimate and personal sort of use for things in the world. Like, so for other people, you would use a pencil and you think, oh, this pencil is just a tool to do this. But for me, the pencil was a symbol and a way that I explored this sort of invisible realm of infinite possibility. Consciously, as a child, I believed in the magic of pencils, right? So that's the way I'm looking at the world. I'm looking at the world for magic. I'm looking at the world to recognize myself. I'm looking at material for magic. I'm looking at material for reference to the self, for a rhyme of the self. And so a rhyme of the self is parts of where you see parts of the world and you're like, that's me. I know it. There might not be language for it, but I know it in the crevasses of my soul. I recognize. And so I always collected bottles. I always collected things. I always picked things up. I was always sort of sometimes like hypnotized by certain colors of blue. So when I made this artwork one time, didn't call it an artwork at a time, but a historian saw it. And the historian said, you should do some research on the Congo. You should do some research on things because you're doing things that have been done for a long time and they're very meaningful. I'm not going to sit here and tell you about them, but you need to start doing research. And so that historian's wife is one of the world's foremost experts on the Gullah Geechee. She did a talk about the rupture that exists between Africa, western coast of Africa, eastern coast of the United States, kind of like by where you are, really.
Yeah, they have Gullah Geechee in
Yeah,
Savannah.
it's Dr. Etta Fields Black, right? And so she would I would make work really deeply in the technology of my soul and technology of my humanity, which is trusting my instincts, looking for material that fit that resource rhyme of self. And she would say, the Gullah Geechee do this thing with bottles. And it means this. And they have vessels on the grave, and it means this. And we can chase it back to these places because we know where a lot of these enslaved people actually came from. We know where they exited the western coast of Africa from. And so I work to bridge that really original technology that existed in Africans and bridge it as an active, useful, purposeful technology for this life, this world today. But there's always this play in the work. So the piece is standing on a chair, which is also on a tin that says pure lard. And there's this way that when I was growing up at the Mexican bakery, they would use lard. And my mother had a way of talking about how my mother is also from Louisiana, but they had a way of talking about lard as like with all these uses. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the one section from Toni Morrison's Sula, where she puts lard in the baby's butt because the baby is so constipated, she figures it's about to die, and she does that. So there's this way of using all of the animal and doing the best you could with the rations that enslaved people were get. Like you could make things taste better with lard, but there was also this way that the phrase pure lard was to say that something is a lie. Like that's just pure lard. That's like, it's nothing. And so always playing with this place of how as human beings, we will enter the technology of our humanity and we will use our imagination. We will be resourceful, which enslaved Africans have always had to do on this land, not being afforded like a whole human dignity. So there's this play in that piece with the phrase, that's pure lard. That's a lie. But there's also the evidence that we, in lard, of not letting anything go to waste, letting what is useful be useful for how it is useful, and you decide yourself. And so what is the lie? The lie is the lie is white supremacy, right? The lie is that separation. So the piece is raised up on a chair. It's a child's chair, right? And it's raised up and it's elevated. So we know that when enslaved Africans were brought to that coast and to those markets, they were elevated on these platforms so that you could look at you could like, check,
right.
They could check out the product, right? And so the pieces, but we also know from all Greek and Roman sculptures and statues that this shit is elevated. Nobody has their feet on the ground. Mm-hmm. None of these gods and goddesses, none of the Venuses, they don't have their feet on the ground. And they don't have their feet on the ground for a reason, because they're not peasant people. They're you lifting up, they're elevated. So there's also that play. There's also that juxtaposition and that polarity of who do we hold high? But also have to look at because some of those the pedestaling that was done when the people were coming off the ship. So what the work is doing as a power figure, all of my work I think of as reckoning work. Then there's this work that has to be done, and a lot of people are doing it. There's like spiritual people are doing it, historians are doing it, photographers are doing it. And they might not call it reckoning work, but it is the work of bringing the places of human rupture back together. So white supremacy is an incredible rupture. It's a rupture from the sort of even the scientific truth of what race is, it's like, and what it's not. Like, it's a rupture of human beings from the land, from the earth. It's all of these things. And so the reckoning work reckons with all of these ingredients, catastrophic ingredients, all of this, this evidence of even the evidence that exists in the world of quantum physics, the evidence that exists for how powerful human beings are. And it works to bring these places of truth back together for the living world, right? So we're gonna need help as human beings, given the way that our brain works, to bring those places, to bring these like disparate places together where we have been separated from each other. We've been separated from land. We've been separated from the power of our own humanity. We've been separated from the technology of our humanity, which is love, courage, which is the actual capacity to be in conflict with other human beings without accumulating death.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because we didn't always do conflict the way the human beings didn't always do conflict like this. Like massive accumulation of death and massive infrastructure and massive systems to support movements of death, weapons of death. And so the work is a reckoning work. And part of the work that that we are really poor at as, especially in Western civilization, is just the work of grieving, the work of being like, I have found there's something over the past 15, 20 years, what I call an epidemic of feellessness, where there's sort of this reward for being like, oh, that's just another mass shooting. At least, oh, they only killed 14 kids at that school. It's all right. It's going to keep happening. That's the way the world is. Cats die all the time. The police are never going to stop killing Black people. I'm not going to grieve. I'm not going to watch any videos. This is just normal. This constant ingesting of death and suffering and cruelty into a place where it has really oppressed our technology as human beings to be human together. And so I do a lot of reckoning work around with these images. So it's like the Pieta. So it's like, here's this figure. But to have these places in, a lot of times there's in art museums or in private collections, because I've made several figures that are holding other figures where people can have these sort of intimate, quiet moments of feeling and of connecting. And to me, that is, I'm doing a service to myself and to my own soul, because it is incredibly difficult to watch people die. And I don't know if people have taken, I don't know that I haven't heard people give an accounting to what it has actually been like to have the living memory in your head of George Floyd being suffocated to death, because we're not watching just police brutality, we're actually watching someone die.
Right.
And we're doing that without the sort of connective tissue of our life being connected to that life, being connected to this. And so it's this place that I don't always have all the language for, but I'm thinking about this as a reckoning work, a technology to heal rupture. And I'm thinking about, I am not just thinking about, I am living in the knowledge that art museums and art spaces are actually, whether they acknowledge it or not, because the academy done fucked up people and made them think that you can't have spaces where you affirm conceptual work, spiritual work, all these different things, and they're affirmed in an even landscape without it being like, oh, this is up here and this is here. But for me, spaces like that you're in are actually spaces of social healing, whether or not it is acknowledged out loud. And it is that because of time, space, contemplation, objects, and all these ingredients that go into there. So this work Pure Lard was made in residency with Idea Furnace at Pittsburgh Glass Center. It was my first glass residency. I've had a couple since, and I work Pittsburgh Glass Center. This is, whether or not this is an important part of the story or not, I have experienced a lot of institutions and organizations that pick up on whatever is the pounding, trending language of the day around diversity and inclusion and whatever, without actually doing the internal work of excavating the violence inside of the institution. So I have been brought into so many spaces where people are like, we need to have more Black artists. They say we need to have more queer artists. And you get there and people treat you, they actually treat you like you're you're worthless. They treat you like you're doing them that they're doing you this great favor, and there's all these like weird codes and these weird sicknesses that I've experienced. One of the first times I didn't experience that was at Pittsburgh Glass Center. So it was a place that I felt safe at. And safety, we can't, I cannot gloss past how important safety is working with institutions. So I felt safe in the place where I created that work. I could create that work there without having to explain it to a bunch of white people who just don't get it. It just can be so weird. And I don't want to have to I'm not performing grief or performing sorrow for you. I'm not doing any of that. So I made that work in a space where I was safe. And I made it, I think about Saidiya Hartman's book, Wayward Lives and Beautiful Experiments, where she talks about experimenting with freedom. Well, that's what I got a chance to do because I felt safe. So I didn't feel like I needed to perform an incarnation of what an institution thought I would be as an artist. So I'm in this space, and the second time I was at the Pittsburgh Glass Center, I had one of the kids from the art house with me, and her house was raided. I got a phone call from the street, and they said there's SWAT teams. This shit's bad. And one of my neighbors called, and I was like, I have the kid. I have this little girl. What do I do? And so the people at the Glass Center, I had to tell them that this thing was happening because I have this little girl, and I don't know if I should take her, and the police are going to take her and get rid of this stuff. And so the Pittsburgh Glass Center just lets us stay. We just stay for hours. They order food for the little girl. The director of the Glass Center is carrying this little girl around on her back. And I'm like, okay, we're safe. We're good. But that happened. And it got bad. I mean, that situation just got bad. It got worse. And so making that work when all that stuff was happening in the world, like it was very sad. But I was also in a place where I could be sad. I could be sad. I could be productive. I didn't have to explain anything to anybody. And so I got to experiment and move through things that are really like broad, systemic, like really catastrophic issues in the work. And so in those they hand blew a lot of those vessels for me. And some of them have language in them. They have words in them. I would put a call out on the internet and I would say, I'm making these words, like making this work. You can send me words, you can send me phrases of names, and I will write it down and they go into the bottles. So thinking about the bottle tree, thinking about protective spirits, thinking about the vessels on the graves, the Gullah-Geechee, like putting the vessel on so the spirit can rise up and move through there. And all of that is active. All of that is active for me. This place of being intentional about what you want the work to do. And also being unburdened by a sort of white supremacist sort of separate view that the work doesn't work like that. It doesn't have power. It doesn't do that. And so I mostly work in the same colors, red, white, blue, black, and gold. And so when I'm working with blue, I am working with the blues in the sense that Ma Rainey spoke of the blues, in the sense that Bessie Smith spoke of the blues, in that sense where Ma Rainey said, people think we're singing the blues. Like some people think we're just singing songs, but we're not singing songs. We're moving things. I brought something up and I brought it out, and now I have more space inside of me. So there's that way that this object that you can have moment of intimate contemplation, reckoning. You can have this time, this moment, and you can enter into that same technology that Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey talked about of being with the blues and having something move through you and making more space. So there's that way that I'm in a relationship with the color blue, which my people consider as a gift, because if you think about it, the color blue could have actually been any color, but it's what it is. And so we could talk about frequencies of light and how the color blue actually, what it does to your body. like what different shades of blue, different times of blue, but we know that blue is in and of itself this really powerful frequency. So there I'm thinking also about African traditional religion. I'm thinking about who wears that color blue and the ritual around that color blue, which is also connected to ritual for water. And water is life and water is medicine. We are mostly water. Water connects us. And so there's that place of bringing in literally the science of our humanity and bridging this rupture. And I always think about how when I was in third grade sociology class and they told me what the color blue meant on the American flag. And I was really perplexed. I was like, I'm sorry. It's like, whose glory? Whose glory is it? Like, whose peace? Whose blood? I mean, and for real. And I remember asking the teacher that, and they like write to my mom, and they're like, she's asking, they thought I was contrary. Like the teachers didn't like me, but my mother had a bumper sticker on her car from the time like I was a little kid, and the bumper sticker said question authority. And so I felt like I had no reason to think that it would be a problem to ask white teachers, like, whose blood is this? Like, whose blood is represented here? Is it like, we just passed, like, we just did our Native American chapter. Is it their blood? Like, whose blood is it? And it was a problem. And so there's, again, that polarity. There is, again, that place. It's like, who built this? Who is glorified here?
Right. It's never just a metaphor. There's a history.
Yes. And so there's this way that I grew up receiving through media the information that I was ugly and that I was not as valuable as white children, as little white girls, which I still experience some today just by what happens if I look at, I know a girl who's been missing for more than a year. But I look at what happens when white girls go missing. And I look at what happens, like the epidemic in this country of missing Black and Indigenous women. I will get Amber Alerts. I remember getting an Amber Alert for a little white girl who was missing. I got the Amber Alert in Pittsburgh, and she was missing from Orange County, California. And that was before the Black and Missing Project came out. And they were like, why aren't you running Amber Alerts on all these little Black girls who are going missing? Because they figured that the girls had just been murdered, or they figured, like that report that came out of DC, they just thought less of them. And that I grew up with that. I grew up internalizing the truth of my own worthlessness, which is a pure lard, pure fucking lard. And so that small figure, that way that I have had to, for years, work with children who are wounded in a way that I have yet to experience a program, a service, or a system that really is reconnecting them. One that is letting them know that they have been lied to about their worth, that's pure lard. And then reconnected them to the wonder of their own life. So there's a place of horrific pain for me in that piece. And it's the pain of realizing I'm not ever going to be able to reach all these children and their parents to help them to know the wonder of their humanity originally, and be able to help them to decipher that which is pure lard and that which is pure. So in the work, I'm always, much to like the heartbreaking truth, I'm always trying to fix something. Mm-hmm. I'm always trying to put put it back together again. I'm always trying to make a way for suffering to be lessened in the work. And so I sometimes make these images and I want them to hurt a little bit. I want it to be a little confusing. I want it to be there to be a kind of, almost like a kind of scavenger hunt through the piece. Like, well, why is there a chair? Oh, there's this. All this blue stuff, why is it blue? How did she get that blue pick? Like, I want there, like, because if that scavenger hunt can keep someone in front of the work for a little while, then the secret work can go to work and be active. And the secret work for me is all the work that's connected, all of the truth that is connected to my people who did magnificent things with lard, who made the most amazing biscuits, who, like Toni Morrison's story with the lard and the plum, and connecting you to that like deep resourcefulness of being, and how that power, that power, it can be oppressed, but it cannot be, like, energy can't be created or destroyed, it just changes form. Mm-hmm. And so I want the work to do something. I want the work to hurt people, because in that place of hurt, I think naturally when we hurt, we seek a way to not hurt anymore. Yeah. And so but when Francie and them called me and told me that worker just dropped it off the back of the truck, I was like, dang, I don't know if we're gonna be able to fix that because of all the glass pieces. But I talked to the glass center about like how to do it and like what really works. And yeah.
That we all have a lot of work to do, and I'm just so grateful to be able to, hear from you about your experience.
Oh, thank you for asking me. Let me know if you need anything else. Okay.
Okay, it's an honor, Vanessa. Thank you so much. Okay.
All right.
Bye.